The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jasmine Crockett, a fierce and eloquent civil rights attorney, stood at the podium. She had just finished making a passionate argument against a controversial law many believed infringed on voting rights. Judge Andrew H. Stone, known for his stern demeanor, had been quietly observing all morning. As Jasmine finished her closing statement, emphasizing the importance of justice and equality, Stone suddenly chuckled. It wasn't a subtle smile, he laughed out loud. The unexpected burst of laughter echoed through the courtroom, causing a ripple of shock among everyone present. Jasmine's confident expression faltered for a moment as she turned to face Judge Stone directly. The judge's eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and disbelief, but his laughter was not mocking, it seemed almost incredulous, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Reporters' pens hovered over their notebooks, jurors exchanged confused glances, and even the opposing counsel looked taken aback. Jasmine, known for her poise under pressure, straightened her shoulders and met the judge's gaze head-on. "Your Honor," she began calmly, "is there something about my argument that you find so humorous?" Her voice was steady, but those in the room could sense the tension underlying her words. Judge Stone wiped a tear of laughter from the corner of his eye and replied, "Ms. Crockett, it's rare that a legal argument makes me laugh, but your passion and determination are undeniable. I was laughing at the irony, how the very ideals you champion are often tested by the very system we uphold here." Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly, not out of anger but sharp curiosity. "So, you're saying the system is flawed? That the ideals we fight for are merely aspirational and not always reflected in practice?" Judge Stone nodded slowly. "Exactly. The law is supposed to be impartial and just, but it's administered by humans, with all their biases and limitations. Your argument shines a light on that contradiction, and it's both inspiring and, frankly, a bit unsettling." A murmur of agreement swept through the courtroom. Jasmine took a deep breath and continued, her voice steady and passionate. "That's why it's our duty, not just as lawyers but as citizens, to challenge those imperfections. To ensure the law serves its true purpose, protecting the rights and dignity of every individual, especially those marginalized by the system." Judge Stone leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Well said. It's rare to hear such conviction that acknowledges the complexities without losing faith in justice." The atmosphere shifted from tension to something more reflective and respectful. Even the opposing counsel appeared thoughtful, no longer the adversary but a witness to a moment of genuine discourse. Jasmine's reaction, initially taken for offense, had transformed the courtroom dynamic. Her composure and sharp intellect had not only answered the judge's unexpected laughter but had also sparked a deeper conversation about the intersection of law, justice, and humanity. The judge's chuckle had broken the ice, transforming what could have been a contentious standoff into a rare moment of mutual understanding. Judge Stone glanced around the courtroom, then back at Jasmine. "Ms. Crockett," he began, voice carrying a new warmth, "I want you to understand something. Your argument, while challenging the very foundation of some long-standing statutes, reminded me why we keep striving to perfect the law. It's not about blind adherence to precedent, it's about questioning, evolving, and pushing boundaries." Jasmine nodded slowly, the corner of her mouth curving into a small, knowing smile. "That's the essence of progress. If we accept flaws without confrontation, we become complicit in injustice." The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably. The jurors seemed more engaged, the spectators leaned in, and even the court reporters paused their writing, sensing the weight of the moment. Judge Stone continued, "You speak of ideals, and I see that you believe in the possibility of a better system. It's that belief, that hope, that drives change, sometimes slowly, sometimes in bursts of profound upheaval." Jasmine responded, "Change is uncomfortable but necessary. The law must reflect the evolving values of society, or it risks becoming obsolete, or worse, a tool of oppression." At that moment, the opposing counsel rose, clearing his throat. "If I may," he said, "while I don't fully agree with Ms. Crockett's conclusions, I respect her commitment and her willingness to challenge the status quo. This court, and our society, benefit from such discourse. Judge Stone nodded approvingly. Indeed. The courtroom is not just a battleground for legal points but a forum for ideas, ideas that shape the future. As the session adjourned, Jasmine packed her notes with a renewed sense of purpose. What began with an unexpected laugh had evolved into a powerful dialogue about justice, perseverance, and the law's potential to embody true fairness. Outside the courtroom, reporters clustered around her, eager to capture her thoughts. Jasmine smiled, knowing this moment, her calm reaction to laughter, had spoken volumes louder than any prepared statement ever could. As the laughter faded and Judge Andrew H. Stone leaned back with a smug expression, the courtroom grew uncomfortably quiet. The tension was thick, thicker than the silence that hung in the air. Jasmine Crockett remained completely still for a moment, her eyes locked on the judge with razor-sharp focus. Then, with deliberate calm, she stood up. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I came here to represent not just a case, but a principle, one that shouldn't be reduced to mockery." Judge Stone raised an eyebrow, as if amused by her resolve, but she didn't let that shake her. "I am not here for your amusement. I am here because the people I serve demanded a voice in this chamber. I have every right to speak, to challenge, and to hold power accountable, even when that power sits behind a bench." Gasps rippled across the gallery. No one in the room had expected her to speak so boldly, not to him. The judge's face stiffened. For the first time, his confidence faltered. Crockett continued, walking slowly to the center of the courtroom floor, speaking now not just to the judge, but to the public watching from the back, and the media cameras peeking through the open door. "We don't bow because someone wears a robe or holds a gavel. We respect the law. But when that law becomes a tool for belittlement and bias, it is our duty to speak. Loudly. Clearly. And without apology." Judge Stone opened his mouth, perhaps to cut her off, but Jasmine raised her hand. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you can laugh if you want. But I promise you, the people aren't laughing with you. They're watching. And they're ready." Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Even the clerk stopped typing. The balance of power in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it for several heartbeats. The courtroom remained frozen in silence. Judge Stone adjusted his robe and leaned forward, trying to reassert control with his voice. "Miss Crockett," he said tightly, "you are treading dangerously close to contempt." But Jasmine didn't flinch. "With all due respect," she said coolly, "I think what's contemptuous is how easily a sitting judge finds humor in the voices of those demanding accountability." There was a sudden murmur from the crowd. A few spectators clapped quietly before being hushed. Reporters' pens were moving fast now, cameras tilted toward her. The spotlight had shifted. She turned slightly, addressing the room with calm confidence. "I am not here to throw accusations. I am here to reveal something deeper, the dismissiveness that so often cloaks itself in formality. The smugness that disguises itself as decorum. And the unchecked power that believes it will never be questioned." Stone shifted in his chair. His face reddened slightly, not with anger, but with something closer to discomfort. For years, his courtroom had been an arena he controlled. But now, in front of dozens of witnesses, it was clear, someone had taken the stage from him. Jasmine continued, walking slowly, each word landing with precision. "You laughed at me, Your Honor. But what you really did was laugh at the idea that a black woman could stand in this court and challenge you on the law, on the Constitution, and on integrity. And that is exactly why I won't sit down." A silence fell so heavy it felt like weight pressing on everyone in the room. Then, one voice, soft but firm, from the back. "She's right." More murmurs. Another person stood. "Let her speak." Judge Stone's gavel slammed against the block. "Order. This is my courtroom." But the energy had changed. No one was intimidated anymore. His authority, once unquestioned, now felt fragile. Jasmine turned back to the bench, her voice quiet but full of steel. "This might be your courtroom, Judge. But it belongs to the people. And we're done being quiet." The gavel pounded again. Louder. Faster. More desperate. "Order!" Judge Stone barked, his voice rising above the crowd, more out of panic than control. "This is my courtroom, and I will not have it turned into a circus." But no one was listening anymore. The gallery had come alive, not with chaos, but with quiet, determined solidarity. People stood, slowly, one by one. No shouting, no chanting. Just standing. Silent. A unified presence that said, "We see you. We hear her. And we're not leaving." Jasmine Crockett didn't need to raise her voice again. She simply turned to face the judge and stepped forward once more. "Judge Stone," she said evenly, "you've ruled from this bench for over a decade. But the law isn't a stage for your ego. It's a foundation meant to uphold justice. Equal justice." He glared at her. "You're out of line." "No," she replied, her tone calm as ever. "I'm exactly where I need to be. And the real question is, how long have you been out of line without anyone bold enough to call it out?" The judge opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. The clerk, the bailiff, even the court reporter had stopped. Everyone was watching. Waiting. And Jasmine wasn't finished. "You laughed at me because you thought that gavel protected you. But that gavel? It's just wood. It only has power when people believe in the person holding it." She turned to the public again. "And today, that belief is gone." A beat. Then someone in the back slowly began to clap. One person. Then another. Then the entire room. Not wild applause, just steady, sharp claps that echoed like a countdown. Stone stared out at the sea of people who no longer looked afraid of him. His hand hovered over the gavel, then slowly fell away. He looked smaller now. Not because he was sitting, but because the illusion of untouchable authority had cracked. Jasmine stepped back. "Court is still in session, Your Honor," she said. "But the people are watching now. And we don't forget." Judge Stone sat still, his hand resting uselessly beside the gavel that once commanded fear. The courtroom, now fully awake, seemed to hold its collective breath. Jasmine Crockett remained standing, unshaken, her eyes still fixed on him. Not with anger. Not with contempt. But with something far more powerful, expectation. "You wanted silence," she said, her voice now softer but even more potent, "but silence is the luxury of those who've never had to fight to be heard." He didn't respond. She took a slow step forward. "You wanted compliance. But what you got was courage." Another step. "You wanted to laugh. But now the joke feels small. And you? Smaller." The entire courtroom was silent. Not a phone buzzed. Not a chair creaked. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to dim in reverence. Stone shifted in his seat. His face was blank, but his eyes were swimming. Not with tears, but with uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, he realized what it felt like to be truly accountable. Not in a headline. Not in a hearing. But here, in front of the people. Then Jasmine turned, to the audience, to the cameras, to the moment itself. "This wasn't just about me. This is about every woman who was told she was too loud. Every black professional who was laughed at for daring to be bold. Every citizen who walked into a courtroom and felt like justice wasn't built for them." People were crying now. Quietly. Not from sadness, but from a feeling many hadn't experienced in a courtroom before, hope. And then she delivered the final blow, not in anger, but in truth: the robes don't make you right. The bench doesn't make you better. And the gavel doesn't make you immune. If you forget the people will remind you who you serve. Jasmine turned, gathered her notes, and walked away, not because she was dismissed, but because she was done. She didn't need the judge's approval. She had already won something bigger than a case. As she reached the exit, reporters flooded out after her, but she paused only once, to glance back at Stone. He was still sitting there. Still silent. And for the first time in his career, the courtroom no longer felt like his. It felt like the people's. Outside the courthouse, the air was electric. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged. Microphones extended like spears, all pointed at Jasmine Crockett as she descended the courthouse steps. But she didn't rush. She didn't grandstand. She simply paused, centered herself, and looked straight ahead. Her phone buzzed, dozens of times. Calls. Messages. Notifications from across the country. Clips of the confrontation were already trending. Her words, "The robes don't make you right," were being quoted, stitched, reposted, and carved into captions under headlines reading, "Crockett turns courtroom into a movement." Judge Stone silenced by the truth. History made in court today. But for Jasmine, it wasn't about headlines. It was about what came next. A woman approached her, middle-aged, holding her daughter's hand. She didn't speak at first. Just nodded, eyes misty. "My daughter wants to be a lawyer," she said softly. "She saw you today. And now she knows she can be." Jasmine bent down to the girl's level and smiled. "You don't just become a lawyer," she said. "You become the law. You defend it. You improve it. You live it." Back inside, Judge Stone sat alone in his chambers. The room felt cold. Quiet. Unfamiliar. He looked down at the complaints already starting to stack up in his inbox. Witness statements. Footage. Formal inquiries. A knock came at the door, an aide with an envelope. "Judicial review," the aide said, quietly. Stone didn't open it. He didn't need to. Back on the steps, Jasmine stepped up to the microphones. The crowd hushed. "I didn't plan to make headlines today. I came here to do my job. To fight for truth and fairness. What happened inside that courtroom is just one example of why we need change, not just in the law, but in the people trusted to uphold it." A beat. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither is this movement." Applause erupted. And somewhere, across the country, in schools, in courtrooms, in communities that had been ignored and underestimated, people stood a little taller. The courtroom battle was over. But the ripple it caused? Just beginning. Days later, the confrontation had grown into something far greater than a courtroom moment. It was now a national conversation. Clips of Jasmine's speech played in rotation on every major news network. Op-eds filled the pages of national newspapers. Politicians from both sides were forced to respond. Some dismissed it as grandstanding. Others called it a necessary reckoning. But one thing was undeniable: Judge Andrew H. Stone was under investigation. The state's Judicial Conduct Commission launched a formal review, citing not only his courtroom behavior that day but past complaints that had long been ignored. Law students across the country cited Jasmine's words in debate. Law professors added the courtroom footage to syllabi under a new topic: power and accountability in the judicial system. In Washington, D.C., Jasmine Crockett took the floor of Congress, not as a viral figure, but as a lawmaker. She stood with renewed purpose, her voice stronger than ever. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just about disrespect. It was about exposure. Exposure of the cracks in a system too long protected by silence, by hierarchy, and by fear. She paused, just long enough to let the chamber feel the weight of her words. We cannot reform what we refuse to acknowledge. So let this be the moment we choose to acknowledge it. Loudly. Permanently. And with the courage that justice demands. A standing ovation followed, not from everyone, but from enough to signal something had shifted. Judge Stone would eventually resign before the review concluded. In a carefully worded statement, he cited the changing climate of public service and a desire to step away from the bench with dignity. But history would write it differently. History would say he laughed at the wrong woman. And that woman, Jasmine Crockett, didn't just stand her ground. She moved the ground beneath him. From courtroom to Capitol, her voice echoed, reminding the nation that justice does not serve those who silence it. It serves those who dare to speak in spite of silence. And now, everyone was listening. Months later, the moment had cemented itself in history. What started as a courtroom confrontation was now taught in universities, cited in legal reform proposals, and etched into the public's memory as a spark that lit a broader fire. Jasmine Crockett, now a symbol of principled defiance, launched the Justice Equity Initiative, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers, lawyers, and activists working to overhaul judicial accountability laws at the state and federal levels. The movement gained traction fast, propelled by young people, community leaders, and legal scholars who had waited too long for change that never came, until now. During a nationally televised town hall, she sat across from a panel of legal experts and former judges. One of them asked cautiously, looking back, "Would you have done anything differently that day in Judge Stone's courtroom?" She took a breath. Thought. Then answered with clarity, "No. Because the truth doesn't ask permission to be spoken. It demands it." The crowd erupted. But it wasn't just applause anymore. It was momentum. Across the country, 4 judges were formally investigated in other states following public pressure. 3 law schools created new programs focused on racial bias and courtroom ethics. Hundreds of young women of color cited Jasmine Crockett as their inspiration to enter law. Back in her home district, murals appeared. One showed her mid-sentence at the courtroom podium, a halo of courtroom lights behind her. Beneath the image, words from her now iconic line, "The robes don't make you right." But Jasmine never sought fame. In her office, she kept only one photo framed, an image of the young girl outside the courthouse, the one who told her, "I want to be a lawyer like you." That, she would tell visitors, was the real verdict. Not Judge Stone's resignation. Not the viral fame. Not even the legislative wins. It was the beginning of a legacy. A reminder that power, when challenged by truth, always shifts. And that sometimes, one voice in one courtroom can become the echo of a generation. 1 year later. The courtroom where it all happened, Judge Andrew H. Stone's former domain, was no longer the same. The bench stood empty, but it was no longer feared. It had become a symbol, a site of remembrance and reform. A plaque had been placed near the gallery with the inscription, "Justice is not a performance. It is a promise." And now, Jasmine Crockett stood before a different audience, not as a witness, not as a lawyer, not even as a congresswoman. As a keynote speaker. The National Judicial Reform Summit had invited her to close the event. She stepped onto the stage as thousands watched in the hall and millions more online. "I didn't ask to be the face of a movement," she began, "but sometimes, the fight chooses you. And when it does, you stand. Not just for yourself, but for the people watching who've been told to sit down their entire lives." She paused, scanning the crowd. Former judges. Young students. Community activists. Lawmakers. This country has seen powerful men laugh from high places for too long. But we've entered a new era. One where we don't need a robe or a gavel to speak truth. Just a voice, and the courage to use it. Applause erupted. But she wasn't finished. "I didn't go to that courtroom to go viral. I went because silence was no longer an option. And to anyone out there who feels unheard, unseen, underestimated, I promise you this, your voice matters. Speak it. Live it. Defend it." Her voice lowered, but every syllable carried weight. Because the most important court in this country is not the Supreme Court. It's not the appeals court. It's not even the courtroom we enter when we wear suits and carry files. She stepped forward. It's the court of the people. A standing ovation. As she left the stage, she passed a row of young girls holding notebooks and name tags. One wore a pin that read, "Future Judge." Another had "Crockett for Justice" scribbled across her folder. Jasmine stopped, smiled at them, and said quietly, "Keep fighting. And when the system forgets who it serves, remind it." Then she walked off stage. Not into the spotlight, but into history.